Afghanistan has been torn by wars for over 40 years. Nearly 70% of the country's population has been born amidst armed conflict. The 2001 U.S.-led coalition against the Taliban has proven to be counter-effective. The Taliban now occupies nearly 50% of the country's territory. Therefore, calls for a political settlement with the Taliban among the Afghan people and the international stakeholders are growing stronger and louder. Last year, I met with former President of Afghanistan, Mr. Hamid Karzai, to know his expectations from the peace talks. Peace talks started in Doha in Moscow this year. They were somewhat cumbersome and slow to produce a result. The United States has announced they were pulling out of the negotiations. Mr. Karzai agreed to speak to me once again about the current affairs in Afghanistan. We sat down for an interview that felt like an amiable conversation. Mr. Karzai, you and I met last year before the launch of the peace talks in Moscow.
Yes.
Many believe these were some landmark peace talks because they involved top Afghan peace brokers and the Taliban.
Yes.
You participated in the meetings as well.
Yes.
How do you recall them? And what did it feel like to be at the same negotiating table with the people you had been at war with for so long?
This was a significant event, or these were significant events. Russia provided a unique platform, an icebreaker platform for the Afghan talks. The first was, I believe, done some months before we went to Moscow in 2018, and then the second one in 2019 in May. The first time the Afghan political leaders and community leaders got together with the Taliban leaders for a comprehensive discussion, men and women from our country. It was indeed a landmark event.
In these meetings, some women leaders also took part.
Yes.
One of them, politician and women's rights activist, Fawzia Koofi.
Koofi was there with us, yes.
And she's been very outspoken about the need for the mechanism to enforce the promises that were given to the Afghan women. Mm-hmm. How can Afghan women be sure that things don't go back to how they were under the Taliban? Mm-hmm. And how can Afghan leaders like you ensure that women's rights are at the heart of every agreement and every settlement with the Taliban?
This is one of the most important questions that we have facing us. And this is also an issue that we did raise during the talks in Moscow, especially the women as well who were with us raised it. The Taliban response was very positive on education and on the rights of women. Afghanistan's progress and the right of Afghan women to participate in the society, in our social, political, and economic life, can't go back. In other words, it's not negotiable in lots of ways. Therefore, those rights are there that the Afghan people want, and we want our daughters and girls to be educated and our women to be in full spectrum of life with us. And this is an issue that the Afghan women have been extremely adamant about, and will keep it that way.
Do you think all the negotiating parties are ready to yield their ground?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And actually, we don't see much difficulty in this regard. We believe the Taliban understand. They have given us assurances. They're also the Afghan people. Mm-hmm. They also need their country to move forward and to make progress. They also have children, like we have. So I'm surely they would also want their children to educate and to do better in life.
Did you see a lot of common ground or a lot of common vision of the future?
A lot of common ground. The need for peace. The need for the society to get back together. The need for Afghanistan not to have any more bloodshed. The need for Afghanistan to make progress. The need for Afghanistan to be seen like any other country in the world. This was extremely strongly felt by both sides. And the fact that the moment we sat together there, the Taliban and the Afghans, the rest of Afghans, other Afghans, the feeling was that as if the desires were the same, and for a common country, for a common society of ours. So that was extremely significant. I'm glad you asked this question.
Oh, that sounds very positive. Well, even though the peace talks started this year, violence has worsened in Afghanistan.
Yes.
After the killing of an American soldier, U.S. President Donald Trump has announced the U.S. was stopping any negotiations with the Taliban. Do you see the two resuming the peace talks anytime soon?
Well, it was sad. The tweet by President Trump to stop the talks or to end the talks was not welcomed by the Afghan people. Recently, Ambassador Karzai and Lisa Curtis from the National Security Council of the President's Office, they both visited Afghanistan just about 2 weeks ago, and they heard loud and clear from the Afghan people for the need to immediately resume the peace talks with the Taliban. That's what the Afghans want. So that message was clearly given to them, and surely the message has reached President Trump, and we very much want the talks to resume.
In the light of all of this, of the stopping negotiations, China, Pakistan and Russia have initiated four-party negotiations. What role do you think the governments of these countries can play in restoring peace in Afghanistan?
The 25th of last month, 25th of October, there was a very important discussion among four countries in Moscow: the United States, Russia, China and Pakistan. And all four of them agreed on moving the process forward, and agreed on convening the next meeting in Beijing. The preparations are underway for that meeting in Beijing, which we hope will be organized and convened as soon as possible. So we welcome that sort of coordination. We also hope that another of our neighbor, large neighbor, Iran, will participate, and also as we move forward, our other neighbors, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and Turkmenistan will participate, so Afghanistan gets a support unit from the neighborhood of Afghanistan, and also from the major powers like the three that I mentioned earlier.
Afghanistan had presidential elections in September. Although the voter turnout was low, there's still 2 million people who showed up at the polling stations and voted on the election day, despite the threats from the Taliban. So that means there's support among the Afghan people for the government. Do you think the intra-Afghan peace negotiations are possible without involving the Afghan government?
We want the government to participate. Nobody wants the government not to participate. The Afghan people's priority is peace. The low turnout for the elections was because of that. They in fact told us that, well, peace is more important than conducting elections in which people are not able to participate easily, or are not willing to participate easily. So the message was clear in that regard, that peace is the priority. With all that, the presence of the Afghan government is something that we are all asking for. The difficulty is that the Taliban are not willing at this point to talk to the government. The Taliban were not talking to my government either, publicly, though privately we had a lot of talks and conversations with individual leaders of the Taliban. With that in mind, we must do all we can to create a mechanism whereby an opportunity is provided for a conference to be held where the Taliban, the Afghan government, and all other Afghan leaders sit together and advance the cause. An understanding is required in here, both from the Taliban and the Afghan government, to make it easy for both sides to get together and launch the talks. And that's what we are trying to achieve.
I hope this happens sooner for the Afghan people.
Very much, very much, very much.
Afghanistan has definitely no lack in vibrant, progressive youth, doctors, educators, journalists, civil rights activists. And Afghanistan never had lack in people who speak up their mind, who can, stand up for what they believe in. Realistically, what future can they hope for?
Well, one of those countries that contributed in the past 18 years to Afghanistan's educated youth, or education for our youth, was Kazakhstan. 1,000 scholarships were given by the first president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev. And the Afghans availed of that opportunity. Just about a month ago, a month and a half ago, I met with a group of 25 young Afghans who had just returned from Kazakhstan. Doctors, engineers, economists, they had studied in all walks of life. So very grateful for that. And do convey my message to the people of Kazakhstan for this remarkable support to the Afghan people. Yes, there is this educated youth, aspiring youth, wishing to have a better Afghanistan, and a society that's not only outspoken but very, very demanding as well. So the prospect for Afghanistan with the return of peace is one of a fast-moving society towards integration with the rest of the region and towards better prosperity.
I know, I'm sure not many people ask you this, but I'd like to ask you this. What can we, the countries, the people, learn from the Afghan people?
A very important question. Learn from us this. Stick to your own traditions and live with your own means. And as far as the stability of the society is concerned, as far as the well-being and progress of Kazakhstan is concerned, adopt a political model that suits you best, that gives you the path that you want. And the model that Kazakhstan adopted after its independence 30 years ago under the leadership of Nursultan Nazarbayev was one of very wise conduct within the country, attempt to bring progress and prosperity and education, and externally to engage positively with all around you and beyond. That's a very successful model, and we can see it in the days that we were here yesterday and today, that works very well.
Thank you, Mr. Karzai.
Good to talk to you.
Mr. Hamid Karzai sounded very upbeat about the prospects of the peace talks. I hope his optimism translates into restored peace in Afghanistan for the Afghan people in the near future. This was the interview of the day with me, Lazat Shatayeva. Thank you for being with me.